Welcome, one and all. It's Erickson here across the United States, and boy, am I glad to have you with me. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you'd like to be on the program, if you want the show notes, because you know when we get on the show at noon, about that time, we send out an email. All the stuff I'm going to talk about, the stuff I'm going to try to talk about if I have time, and you can get all the links to all of it. All you have to do is text the word data to 33777, subscribe. You get a discount on the subscription. And we've got so much stuff today. This is one of those rare days where I've sat down, what do I want to talk about? Where do I put this? Where do I put that? There's a lot that we got to cover, international and national. It can't all be politics today. We'll see where we wind up at the end of the show with all the other stuff. Now, I've got to begin here because this is the most pressing story, I think, for everyone, and that is early voting. Record-breaking first day of early voting in Georgia. Side note, and I'm going to start with the tangent. Some of you, I'm on a group chat, and one of the guys in the group chat says, I only vote on election day. That means you may not vote. I need you to understand this, particularly those of you who are Trump supporters. You have spun in your mind, many of you, so many conspiracy theories about the early voting. Democrats are all going to vote early. I would rather you vote early than not be able to vote on election day. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if Antifa shows up and tries to block people from voting in some states. Better you vote now than be disrupted on election day. I'm getting an absentee ballot. It arrives in the mail today, according to the email I got from the post office. It should be there today. I will be traveling, as I have every election year. I have to vote by absentee because I'm not around on election day. I'm traveling somewhere in the country for election day. You want to vote early if you can, and here's why. Storms, snow, traffic jams, Antifa disruptions, you name it. If you're trying to vote on election day, you may want the ceremony of it. You may believe the conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories are largely crap. The ceremony of it, I understand. If I had a preference, it would be we all have to stand in line on election day and vote. But you don't have to if you don't want to. And there are plenty of people every year who do that, and it cost Republicans a House seat in New York in a special election just last year because there was a massive blizzard on the day of the election and people couldn't make it to the polls, and they're not going to cancel the election due to weather. Now, those people just couldn't make it to the polls, and the Republicans lost a close race because not enough of them could show up. If you really want Donald Trump to win, you better go vote as soon as you can so that on election day when it gets here, you're not stuck in traffic or bad weather or an Antifa riot to keep you from voting. So go vote. But I need to say something very important. Some of you are looking at the early voting, particularly you Democrats, and you are getting a little bit excited by the early vote. I would not do that if I were you. Some of you Republicans are getting excited too when you look at Pennsylvania and you look at Florida. I would not do that if I were you. Early voting is not indicative of the winner of the election. In fact, here's what I suspect. Kamala Harris will win the early vote, and Donald Trump will win the day of vote. And that's not a hard guess to make because that's been the pattern. It used to be that Republicans always won the early vote. Republicans nationwide used to win the early vote. And then they elected a man named Donald Trump who convinced all the Republicans that early voting was some dark, sinister conspiracy and they should not do an early vote. And the result has been that now Democrats win the early vote because Republicans talk themselves out of going to vote early. You want to vote early. But if you don't vote early, vote on election day. But if you do vote on election day, don't interpret the results of early voting as a winner or loss for your candidate. They're actually meaningless. Statistically, they're pretty meaningless. We just happen to know that in the past, most Republicans showed up in early voting and Democrats showed up on Election Day, and now the pattern has reversed itself. You can't take a lot from the early vote. This is Harry Itten on CNN.
I rarely beg the audience for anything. I beg of you, don't read anything into any of these trends. Please, every 4 years we do the same gosh darn thing. Look, here's the bottom line. An Election Day vote counts the same as an early in-person vote or a mail vote. We know from the polling, and we know through history, that Kamala Harris is very likely going to win that mail vote. We know the early in-person vote is going to be very, very close. Appointedly in this poll, I can find a few polls, in fact, where Trump is ahead in that. But we know that Donald Trump is going to crush the Election Day vote, and it doesn't matter when the vote is cast. They all count the same. One vote counts for one vote, whether it's cast today or whether it is cast on November 5th, John.
And that goes for people looking at this from both sides. There's nothing magical about an election day vote versus a vote that's mailed in early. There are trends, though, that you can compare when you're talking about early voting, mail voting, in-person voting.
You can try. You could certainly try. But remember where we were 4 years ago? There was a pandemic. We were in the midst of the COVID pandemic. John and I couldn't stand next to each other 4 years ago. The bottom line is this. There's no discernible baseline in most of these states because in 2020, 69% of the vote was cast early, in person, or by mail. This year, we're looking at maybe about 52%. So how are you supposed to compare this year to 4 years ago? And more than that, you know, you might say, okay, all that record early in-person voting, right? But here's the deal. Even the components of that early vote are going to change because the mail vote is going to be way down. Here's a projection, 23% for this year compared to 43% 4 years ago. The early in-person vote could actually go up. That's what the NBC News poll is suggesting, 29% versus 26% 4 years ago. But the overall complexion and the overall number of folks who are going to cast a ballot before Election Day is going to go way down. But the way they're going to do it is very likely going to change.
Okay. He's right. That is the data. And by the way, the trend lines do appear to hold up. There are fewer absentee ballot requests this year than there were in 2020 because there is no COVID. So some of those absentee ballot voters will show up and stand in line in early voting. I have friends who stood in line and voted this morning here in Georgia. There will be people who vote on Election Day who otherwise would have voted by absentee ballot. I'll vote by absentee ballot because I'll be on the road for the day of the election and won't be able to. So you can't extrapolate anything on who's going to win the race based on early voting. And everybody wants to. Oh, my gosh, did you know that the number of people voting right now, it's just 2-1 Republicans in Pennsylvania right now. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Stop it. Stop trying to. You're not even looking at chicken bones and tea leaves. You're looking at the shadow of dog poop that's rolled off onto something. You're not interpreting this well. Your tarot cards are not going to help. Neither will your magic crystals. You can't do it. And everybody wants to do it. Myself included. But here's what we can take from this. The shameless racial pathological lies of Democrats in 2022 in Georgia. Yesterday in Georgia, 300,000 people voted early. It's the very first day of early voting in Georgia. If you requested an absentee ballot a month ago, yesterday they were processed and sent out the door. Couldn't do it before that. Yesterday was the first day. And in 2022, Joe Biden, Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, and all the other Democrats said it was Jim Crow 2.0, the election reforms in Georgia. Brian Kemp said, no, we've made it easy to vote and hard to cheat in Georgia. Democrats said, no, this is racism. This is racism. Remember the lie they told you? You wouldn't be able to have water at the polls, which was a lie. It actually is a lie. They said all these things, and the media didn't challenge them. The media said they're right. The media went with the Democratic talking point. This is going to suppress the black vote. This is going to suppress the vote. This is going to make it harder to vote. It hasn't. In Georgia, there's a record early vote. In Georgia, black voters and white voters, they're all turning out to vote. In Georgia, Major League Baseball in 2022 pulled the All-Star game from the state in protest of voter suppression laws. They were bullied by Stacey Abrams. She used it as a campaign event. So there's a big music festival in Atlanta, Music Midtown. Brian Kemp, of course, Stacey Abrams, they're on the ballot. Brian Kemp signs a law that gives constitutional carry in Georgia. You don't need a concealed carry permit anymore in Georgia. You can have constitutional carry. You can just go out and get your, you can carry a gun. You don't need a special permit. And music, we can't have our concert here. Stacey Abrams played it up. Oh my gosh. Look at this. They're canceling music festivals and baseball games because Republicans went overboard with concealed carry laws and voter ID laws, and Republicans are regressing the state as Jim Crow 2.0, and everybody's got a gun and we're all going to die. And the music festival canceled. Turns out they're having financial difficulty. And Major League Baseball canceled under pressure from Democratic activists. And you got a record turnout in the state of Georgia, 300,000 people. In Pennsylvania, what is very notable and what is kind of telling, and you can extrapolate this to a degree, Republican voter registration has surged. In Pennsylvania, you got to declare your party, and Republican voter registration has increased at a higher pace than Democrats. In Florida, Democrats are outpacing Republicans in the early vote, but it's closer than it should be. You cannot extrapolate who's going to win Election Day from the early vote. What you can do, though, is you can look at some level of voter enthusiasm and say it is interesting, for the first time in 3 decades, according to Gallup, more people want to identify as a Republican than a Democrat. It is interesting in Pennsylvania that Republicans' voter registration is surging. And in Florida, the Democrats don't have a broad gap from the GOP in early voting. And it is interesting in Georgia. 300,000 people around the state showed up on the first day of early voting to vote. I have been telling people all along for a year and a half or so in Biden versus Trump that this was probably going to be a low turnout election. Kamala Harris entering the race has changed the dynamic. And Democrats look at this and say, oh, it's about us. It means we're going to win. Actually, no. You know, I need more fingers and toes than I have, and I have all of mine, to be able to count the number of people I know who have said privately, you know, honestly, I wasn't going to go vote. Trump versus Biden, who cares? And these same people are now like, I got to go vote to stop Kamala Harris. She is a radical progressive. There were a lot of people who don't like Donald Trump who were just going to say, yeah, 4 more years of Joe Biden. We've survived these 4. We'll survive 4 more. Who are now like, oh, hell no, I got to go stop Kamala Harris. This woman's nuts and also stupid. It's why you're seeing her collapse in the polls all of a sudden as non-Trump Republican voters consolidate behind Trump, realizing she's too radical. We got to go vote against her. This, my friends, tells me a few things. 1, we're going to have higher turnout than I expected. 2, Republicans have consolidated towards Donald Trump. And 3, you still can't interpret early voting to tell you who's going to win. What you can interpret it as, however, is people have decided they're going to go vote in this election. And by the way, that high turnout works for Donald Trump. Do you know why? Ultimately, this isn't extrapolating from early voting. This is just extrapolating the general trend. A higher vote means those low-propensity voters are turning out. And those low-propensity voters, they're voting for Donald Trump.